debt. In fact, next year, the government will spend more on that national debt than on healthcare and the armed forces. When will the government stop their deficits so we can pay doctors and nurses and soldiers instead of bankers and bondholders? Many bad news for Canadians. Rent up, taxes up, prices up, and interest rates up to fight the inflation his deficits cause. In fact, Scotiabank said that their mortgage rates would be 2 full percentage points lower if the government could just control its spending. That would be the difference for hundreds of thousands of Canadians between losing their home and being able to renew their mortgage. So, does the government realize that time is running out, and will they end their deficit spending so that Canadians can keep their homes?
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the official opposition and his MPs are simply not worth the risk. He and his MPs voted against the Canada-Ukraine free trade deal. Why, Mr. Speaker? They made a brutal political calculation that they would have more support from their far-right base here in Canada and in Russia and their friends in the United States than if they would abandon Ukrainians. Cold, calculated, cruel. Behold, Mr. Speaker, the new Conservative Party and their MPs. What a disgrace.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
What's disgraceful and cruel is using Ukraine's vulnerability while Russian tanks are on its soil to shove a carbon tax permanently down their throat. And don't be fooled by their phony outrage. They are desperate to talk about anything except for their terrible budget. That's because not only are workers' paychecks going to pay higher prices and interest rates, but now their tax dollars are going to pay higher interest payments on the national debt. In fact, next year, the government will spend more on that national debt than on healthcare and the armed forces. When will the government stop their deficits so we can pay doctors and nurses and soldiers instead of bankers and bondholders?
Before the Honourable Government House Leader gets up, I just want to encourage members to please do not extend their voices so that the Chair can hear the question from the Honourable Leader. I hear from the far end of the House. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Twice this week, the Leader of the Opposition has demonstrated that he is not worth the risk to Canadians. Not only has he been untruthful in why they didn't vote for the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, because in fact there is no price on pollution in that agreement, Mr. Speaker. So we need to ask, what is the real reason behind this, why they're abandoning support for Ukraine and for freedom and for democracy? But also yesterday, instead of waiting for information on what happened at Niagara Falls, he jumped straight to the conclusion that it was a terrorist attack, Mr. Speaker. That is irresponsible and that is not respectful for Canadians.
Hear, hear. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
If the government truly wanted to help Ukraine, they would support the Conservative motion to export our energy and our military equipment instead of their failed carbon tax. And if they wanted to be honest with Canadians, they would unveil the details of the $15 billion subsidy to a single battery plant that will allow up to 1,600 workers coming from Korea to replace qualified Canadians. Will they do the right thing and at least publish the agreement so that Canadian workers can find out just how many jobs are being filled by taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers?
The Honourable Minister.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And unlike the member opposite who, when it came time to find the resolve to stand up to his leader, when it was time to stand with Ukraine, Canada's support for Ukraine is unwavering. Mr. Speaker, we have committed over $2.4 billion in military aid, from tanks to armoured vehicles and ammunition. We've trained 37,000 Ukrainian troops. The Prime Minister recently announced an additional $500 million in new funding for military assistance. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I spoke to Defence Minister Umerov and I told him 10 million additional rounds of ammunition is on the way. Mr. Speaker, our government stands with Ukraine.
No, you don't. Debt. In fact, next year, the government will spend more on that national debt than on healthcare and the armed forces. When will the government stop their deficits so we can pay doctors and nurses and soldiers instead of bankers and bondholders?